Hello, and welcome to Fear Noir. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently draw you deeper into the darkness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, settle in, let your body relax into stillness, and allow the outside world to quietly fade away. Tonight, a story waits for you in the shadows. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and drift into Fear Noir. Story 1. I did not want to write this, not because I am worried about how it sounds, because I have moved past that concern, somewhere in the middle of everything else that has been happening. I did not want to write it because writing it makes it real in a way I cannot take back. And what it confirms is something I have been working very hard not to look at directly. That I am not the only one this is happening to. After my last post, someone sent me a message. No greeting, no context, no introduction of any kind. Just one line asking whether I had been in the flood. I left it alone for a while. People send strange messages, and usually, the stranger they are, the less worth engaging with. But then a second message came through asking whether I still felt hungry even after eating. Not hungry in the normal sense, that specific kind, the one that sits underneath everything and does not move no matter what you put in front of it. I had not described it that way in anything I had posted. I had barely described it at all, I wrote back. We did not talk the way people normally talk. There was no warmth to it, no getting to know each other, no pleasantries filling the space between the things we actually needed to say. It felt more like comparing symptoms with someone in a waiting room, two people cataloging the same damage and trying to work out whether the overlap was coincidence. They told me about the memory gaps, the way they wake up exhausted, regardless of how long they sleep, the constant low sense that something inside them has gone wrong in a way that does not have a name. Then they said something I had not told anyone, that they could not eat cooked food anymore, that something about it was wrong now, that normal food did not work the way it used to. I had been dealing with the same thing for weeks and had not said a word about it to anyone, because I did not know how to say it without sounding like something had broken in me in a fundamental way, because something had. Saying it out loud, even in a message to a stranger, made my hands go still for a moment. After we had been going back and forth for a while, they asked whether I heard knocking sometimes. I asked what kind. They typed it out exactly like this. Tap, 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 tap. I stopped responding for a while after that. Just sat with my phone and looked at those words and felt the specific cold that comes when something you have been trying to write off as internal, as psychological, as yours alone, turns out to be something someone else is also experiencing in the same precise way. They said they thought something was following them. They asked if we could meet. I knew I should not go. I went anyway. We ended up near the area where the flood happened. That was not something either of us planned, or at least I did not plan it, but when we were deciding where it felt like the only place that made sense, like the location selected itself. The place is still wrong in a way that does not diminish with time. The ground has dried out, but the smell has not left, that deep waterlogged smell that gets into soil and stays there. Like the flood is still present just below the surface, waiting for something to call it back up. They were already there when I arrived, standing completely still, facing away from me. From behind they looked ordinary, a person standing in a quiet place, Nothing unusual about the posture or the way they held themselves. But when they turned around, the first thing I felt was not fear and not surprise. It was recognition. Something closer to the feeling of seeing your own reflection behave in a way you did not expect. They looked like me. Not exactly, not like a copy, but close enough that the similarity registered before I could think about it. The same exhaustion sitting in the eyes, the same thinness in the face, the same quality of emptiness behind everything, like something that should be present had been removed, and the space where it had been was still visible. We did not greet each other. They asked immediately whether it had started yet. I did not ask what they meant by it. I told them it comes and goes, that it is stronger at night, that sometimes I feel like I am standing at the edge of something and the distance between me and the other side is getting smaller. They nodded before I had finished speaking, not sympathetically, more like someone confirming a data point they already had. Then they said, "It does not stop." I asked them to explain, and they did not answer. Instead, they looked past me, over my shoulder, with the particular focused attention of someone who has heard something behind you. They asked if I could hear it. For a moment, I could not. And then, I could. Tap, 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 tap. Not from a door. Not from anything with an identifiable surface. Just out there somewhere in the dark beyond us, directional enough to be locatable, but without a source when we both turned to look. There was nothing there. When I turned back, they were smiling. And that was when the feeling of the encounter changed completely, because the smile was not right. It was too wide and too settled, the smile of someone experiencing something pleasant that had nothing to do with the situation around them. They said, "See, it comes for us." Then something changed in them that I do not know how to describe accurately. Their body stayed the same, but their eyes went somewhere else. That empty quality I had seen in them from the beginning went deeper, like a light behind frosted glass going out, like whatever had still been present and looking out from behind their face stepped back from the window. They said they had tried to stop, stayed inside, avoided people, done everything they were supposed to do. Then they stepped toward me and said that one night they had not stopped. I stepped back without deciding to. I did not ask them to explain. I did not need the explanation because I understood exactly what they were describing. That feeling in the water, the one I have been circling around in everything I have written, the one that felt like quiet and rightness and something finally clicking into place. They had followed that feeling to wherever it goes. They had not pulled back from it. They had gone through. It was when I stepped back that I noticed the smell. Not rot, not anything decomposing, something fresher than that. Something that had not had time to turn yet. And then I noticed their hands, something dark under the fingernails. I looked down at my own hands. The same thing. The knocking came again, louder. Tap, 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 tap. Their expression changed. The smile dropped away, and what was underneath it was fear. Not fear of me, fear of something behind me. They stepped back quickly and said, "Not now," under their breath, almost like an interruption had come at the wrong moment, like they were being pulled away from something they were not finished with. I turned around, and there was nothing behind me, but I felt it. The same presence that has been accumulating since the water, since the door, since the photograph, since all of it. The same thing that has been arriving gradually, getting closer by increments, learning the distance, between itself and me. When I turned back, they were already moving away. Before they went far enough that I could not hear them, they said not to let it stop me. Then louder, with something in their voice that was almost angry, they said next time I would not want it to, and they ran. I did not follow. I stood where I was and did not move for a while, because standing there I finally looked directly at the thing I have been refusing to look at. That feeling in the water, the one I keep returning to in these posts and then backing away from before I get to the center of it, it was not just the feeling of surviving. It was not adrenaline or shock or the way extreme fear can briefly feel like clarity. It was something that came from inside me, and it felt correct. It felt like recognition, like something I had not known was missing had briefly surfaced and shown itself to me. And then I had pushed it back down and told myself it was nothing, and kept pushing it down every time it came back up, which it has kept doing, which it does every night, which is what the hunger is, which is what the knocking is connected to. In some way, I am only beginning to understand the shape of. I have been thinking about what they said, that whatever is knocking is not hunting us. That framing sat wrong with me at first, because everything about it has felt like being followed, like being approached by something that wants something from me. But standing there after they ran, I turned it around. If it wanted to take something from me, it has had enough opportunities. It has been close enough. It has been in my apartment. It has been in the photographs. It has had every chance to do whatever a hunting thing does when it finally reaches what it has been following. But it has not. It arrives, and then something changes, and then it pulls back, or I pull back. I have not been able to tell the difference from inside the experience, but from the outside, if I try to look at it as a pattern, it looks less like something closing in and more like something interrupting. Each time the feeling builds toward whatever it is building toward, there is the knocking, and then something resets. The person I met did not reset one of those times. I do not know how many times the thing that knocks can keep doing what it does. I do not know if there is a number it runs out at, or whether the resistance I have gets thinner each time it has to hold. I do not know if what I am still choosing to call myself is the same thing it was before the water, or whether I am already somewhere in the middle of a process I cannot see clearly enough to name. What I know is that the dark under my fingernails was there before I met them. I noticed it before I noticed theirs, and I looked at it and felt nothing unusual about it, which is the part of this I cannot stop coming back to. I should have felt something about that. I did not. Story 2. I was born in the Bronx and spent the first 10 years of my life there. When I was 10, my mother moved me and my brother up to northern New York, and the reason for the move was not something she explained in full at the time, but that I came to understand later. My father's killer had been released from prison, and she needed distance, and she had family up north who could help hold things together. So we went. A few years after that, my grandfather sold his property in the Bronx and followed us up, the way that generation does, keeping the family within reach. He bought a house by the river on the north side of town, and we moved in with him. The house was a double-wide prefab with an extension and a garage added on, the kind of place that is more comfortable than it looks from the outside. The backyard had a cement patio accessible through glass sliding doors, with a wooden roof built over it to keep the weather off. Past the patio was about half an acre of yard, an above-ground pool with a wooden deck around it, a large tool shed at the back that held the riding mower, and beyond all of that, the woods started. The property line was ringed with trees that went back further than we ever fully explored. It started almost immediately after we moved in. Nothing dramatic at first. Nothing I could have pointed to and called evidence of anything. Just the feeling of being watched whenever I was outside after dark. The kind of feeling you learn to discount, because there is usually nothing behind it. I discounted it for a while. Then winter came and I started finding footprints in the snow. They circled the house. They stopped at each window, oriented inward, facing the glass. Every window. I told myself we had a stalker, which is a frightening thing on its own, but at least a human thing. At least something with a shape I could understand. Nothing escalated beyond that for a while, so I held on to the stalker explanation and kept moving. In high school, I met Chris, who is still my closest friend to this day. Most of the people in that town did not have much use for a Hispanic kid from New York City, and they made that clear in the ways that small towns make things clear. Chris was not like that. He stood up for me before we were even close, which is the kind of thing you do not forget. We started spending time together, and a lot of that time ended up being out in the woods behind the property. The woods had a feeling to them that neither of us ever fully named, but that we both registered, a wrongness that sat just below the threshold of being definable. We went back anyway. We built a structure out of fallen logs that we called the fort, and spent a lot of afternoons out there. And during one of our explorations, we found something that has stayed with me. There was a pit in the ground, irregular and partially obscured, that we would have walked past if we had not been paying close attention. We decided to dig it out. About 3 feet down, we hit a shopping cart that had been buried there deliberately, positioned in a way that seemed to be blocking something beneath it. What it was blocking looked like a tunnel. We did not investigate further. We left and came back the following summer to look again, but we could not find the spot, or something had filled it back in. We never found it again. As we got older, the backyard became our regular territory in the evenings. My grandfather had built a second shed on the opposite side of the yard from the tool shed, closer to the edge of the woods, and he let us use it as somewhere to hang out. I dug a fire pit in the dirt out front of it and ringed it with rocks. This is when things started changing in character. One night, while we were inside the shed, we both heard footsteps moving around the outside of it. We went quiet and looked at each other with the kind of look that does not need words. The footsteps and the rustling that came with them continued for a while, and then stopped, and the stopping was immediately followed by something pounding on the walls, not knocking. Pounding, hard and deliberate, close enough that we could feel it. We stayed completely still for a long time, until it stopped, and then we ran to the house and locked every door behind us. We went back to the shed anyway. I cannot fully explain why, except that we were teenagers, and the combination of fear and curiosity in that ratio tends to win out over self-preservation. The sounds became a kind of regular feature of our nights out there. The rustling, the footsteps circling, occasionally the banging on the walls. After enough repetitions, it started to feel almost normal, which I recognize is its own strange thing to say. You can acclimate to almost anything if it stays consistent enough. Then one night, we saw it. It was past midnight, and we were sitting outside in front of the fire pit, backs to the backyard, the shed to our right, the house to our left, and the tree line that separated our property from the neighbors directly in front of us. I heard rustling from that direction and looked up. There was a figure standing in the trees, tall, extremely tall, and thin, in a way that did not look like a person who was simply lean. It was the thinness of something that had been stretched, the proportions wrong in a way that took a moment to fully register. It was naked as far as I could tell, or at least there was nothing on it that looked like clothing. Its skin was a darkness so complete that it had no texture, not shadow, not dim, but void, like a shape cut out of the world and replaced with nothing. And its face had nothing on it, not obscured, not in shadow, just nothing where features should have been. As I was processing this, it leaned forward, slowly, the featureless face angling in our direction. I was frozen in the way that sometimes happens when your body makes the decision before your brain catches up that something is fundamentally wrong. Then I noticed Chris was already gone, already running for the house. I followed without deciding to. That was the first time. It was not the last. Most of the subsequent sightings happened on nights when we had a fire going. We eventually moved from the fire pit to using an old chimenea the previous owners had left on the stone patio, one of those ornate rusty ones that look like they belong in a different century. It made no difference. Whatever connection there was between fire and the thing in the trees, the chimney maintained it just as well as an open pit. Chris had been dating a girl for a while, someone I will call Vanessa, and she spent a lot of time on the property with us. One night that is difficult to forget, I was alone in my room. Chris was in the shower in the bathroom across from my door, and Vanessa was in the dining room. There was a small laundry room off the dining room that had a back door leading to a wooden porch and steps down to the patio. That door was always kept locked. I heard a crash and then Vanessa screaming. By the time I got to the dining room, she was pale and rigid, staring toward the laundry room and saying that something had burst the door open. The back door was standing wide open. I grabbed my grandfather's .22 rifle, which, looking back, was reckless, and I know it, and I fired into the woods away from neighboring properties and shouted at whatever was out there. Chris came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel and told me I was insane, that if it was a person I could kill them, but the way he said it was the part that stuck with me. He said if it was a person, not assuming it was a person, leaving that open. He had the same thought I did. We both had it without discussing it. After I graduated and things got complicated, after Vanessa and Chris split, and life rearranged itself the way it does, I started seeing a girl I will call Nicole. Toward the end of that winter, I stepped outside onto the patio steps to smoke and heard a sound like a musket firing, loud and sudden, and watched the tree line erupt as if something enormous had been driven through it at speed, snow exploding outward from the impact. I called Chris instead of the police, which tells you something about where my head was. He came over, we took rifles and flashlights and searched the woods. We found nothing. More specifically, we found no footprints anywhere near where the sound and movement had come from. The snow was undisturbed everywhere. It should have shown evidence of something passing through it. A few months later, I told Nicole about the history of the property and everything that had happened there. I expected her to be skeptical. She was not. She wanted to see it herself and suggested having her two friends over for a fire on the patio that night. We sat in a circle facing the tree line, the chimney going, talking and laughing the way you do when the evening is easy. At some point I glanced toward the shed and saw it. The figure was moving along the tree line at a steady pace, coming from the direction of the shed, heading toward the house. Walking in the open, parallel to the woods, completely visible against the darkness behind it. I remember that I actually smiled. After years of this, There was something close to relief in seeing it clearly enough to know that I was not imagining it. This was the moment I would find out. The figure moved until it was directly in front of us. Then it turned its head toward where we were sitting, held for a moment, and kept walking until it passed the edge of the house and was gone. I turned to look at Nicole without saying anything. She looked like she had witnessed something fatal. Pale, jaw open, eyes fixed on the spot where it had been. Then she said nope, loudly and without elaboration, and went inside. We never had a fire together again. She never asked me to explain what she had seen, and I never tried to. A few weeks later, I was at a Civil War reenactment at a local state park and found a book on local history I had not seen before. It described the indigenous people who had lived in the area before the town existed, a tribe with land in that specific location. One night, French soldiers came down the river and burned a long house with everyone inside it. The page after the account had a map of the area where the tribe had lived, showing the approximate location of the longhouse. I looked at that map for a long time. The river was the river across the road from our property. The longhouse sat in approximately the same location as the house I grew up in. Standing there holding that book, everything arranged itself into a shape I could finally see whole. A property built on the site of a massacre. A massacre that involved fire, something that had been present on that land for as long as we had been there, watching, circling, most active on nights when flames were burning. Something that matched, in its description and its behavior, a figure that appears throughout indigenous folklore across the northeastern part of the continent. I had grown up beside it without having the name for it, and now I had both the name and the history underneath it, and neither one made me feel better. A few years later, I was living back with my grandfather, going through a difficult stretch, drinking more than I should have been. One afternoon, I drank enough that I passed out cold. We did not have working smoke detectors. I woke up suddenly and completely, the way you sometimes do when something pulls you out of sleep before you are ready. Sober in an instant, with a feeling I cannot describe precisely, except to say it was not a normal waking. I walked out of my room and found my grandfather in the kitchen fighting a fire on the stove. He was about to throw water on it when I reached him. I stopped him, knowing it was a grease fire, and used salt to kill the flames. Then I looked up and saw that the inside of the vent fan above the stove was glowing. The fan was still running. I told my grandfather we had to leave immediately. I grabbed the wireless phone from the kitchen, got him out the front door, and tried to dial. The phone was dead. I went back inside. I should not have. I know that. The smoke was dense enough that I was navigating by memory through rooms I had lived in long enough to know without seeing them. The kitchen was glowing through the black smoke. I got to my room, shook the blanket on my bed until I caught a glint of light off the phone screen, grabbed it, and got back out. I got through to 911 and managed to convey the basics before the line died from the fire. Later, I was told that the house had plastic ventilation in the stove fan. The fire I had put out had already done enough. The plastic melted, the insulation caught, and from that point, it was structural. They told me we had 2 minutes from when I woke up. If I had slept through it, we would both have been dead inside that house. We did not go back to the property after that day. I have thought about it many times since, about the thing that circled the house every night, about how it was most present, most visible, most active whenever there was fire. about the history underneath the ground the house was built on, what happened there, and how it happened, and about the night I woke up from a dead-drunk sleep, stone cold sober, with no alarm and no reason, 2 minutes before the window closed. I do not know how to hold all of that together into something that resolves cleanly. I am not sure it is supposed to, but I have never been able to separate those pieces from each other, and I have stopped trying to. Story 3. I am in my senior year of college as a criminology major, and one of the required classes for my undergraduate degree is an internship. One of my professors coordinates placements with organizations relevant to the field and assigns us positions where we can gain practical experience outside of the theory that fills most of our coursework. I was assigned to the Central State Prison, and I was genuinely excited about it. The opportunity to learn from people working directly in corrections, to observe their methods, to speak with whoever was handling behavioral analysis or psychology for the facility, all of it felt like exactly where I wanted to be. I have been interested in criminal psychology for a long time, and this seemed like the right place to start forming the connections and understanding I would need moving forward. I wish I could say I was still as excited about it now as I was when I first got the assignment. I am only 3 days into the position, and more has happened than I expected to see in the entire 10-week placement. Part of me had wanted something unusual to happen going into this, the way you do when you are young and have spent too much time consuming media that makes intense work look heroic and interesting, instead of exhausting. But whatever part of the universe listens to those kinds of half-formed wishes took what I wanted and warped it into something I did not anticipate and cannot entirely process. The strange things started on the first day. My supervisor, Mr. Hiley, introduced me to the staff. I was the only intern hired for the semester, so I did not have the option of fading into the background the way I might have preferred. After the introductions, he gave me a tour of the facility. It was larger than I expected, well lit, cleaner than I had assumed a prison would be based on everything I had seen or read. The smell was still there, that dense, unwashed human smell that comes from housing 1,000 men in close quarters, but it did not seem to violate any codes or cross into anything genuinely unsanitary. It was just the smell of people living too close together for too long. We walked through the hallways, and Mr. Hale explained the layout and the history of certain areas, little details about the architecture and the function of each sector. Our footsteps echoed as we moved. His voice carried and bounced off the walls in that specific way voices do in large concrete buildings. I did not notice at the time how strange it was that his was the only voice I could hear. No other conversations, no shouting, no ambient noise from the people who were supposed to be housed there. Just his voice and the sound of our shoes against the floor. Eventually, we reached one of the cell hallways. Most of the cells were occupied, 2 men to a cell in most cases, men of varying ages sitting or lying down on their bunks. He led me to an empty cell in the middle of the hall, and took his time opening the door to show me the interior. It was about 10 feet square, 2 beds against opposite walls, a toilet in the corner. Standard as far as I understood prison cells to be. It was also surprisingly clean, which made me think it had not been occupied recently, or that whoever had been in it last had been unusually tidy. On the way back out of that hallway, I did not receive a single glance from any of the inmates we passed. Not one of them looked at me. I thought that was odd, but I also felt relief, because I had been bracing myself for attention I did not want, comments or stares that would have made me feel unsafe. I told myself the staff must run the facility well, that the inmates were disciplined and understood the boundaries. It was easier to think that than to sit with the feeling that something about their lack of response was wrong, in a way I could not yet name. Because I had expressed interest in speaking with someone from the mental health side of the operation, Mr. Haley introduced me to Dr. Diane Kendrick. She was an older woman, professional, with a small office that looked like it had been arranged carefully and then left untouched for years. He left me with her while he went to lunch, and I sat down in a red-patterned chair across from her desk and took in the room. The walls were mostly bare except for her diplomas and certificates displayed behind her. The rest of the space was taken up by bookshelves packed with mental health texts and self-help books, the kind you see in every counselor's office, the visual shorthand for "I am here to help." On her desk was a mug that said "Keep calm and practice CBT," holding pens and markers. There were a few picture frames showing figures I could not quite make out standing together in an open field. The room smelled overwhelmingly floral, something heavy and synthetic that pressed into the back of my throat. After the usual small talk about my major and what I was hoping to learn, I asked her what a typical day looked like in her position. She told me she works the day shift, that nursing staff covers nights, and that her hours run from 7 in the morning to around 6 in the evening. She does paperwork, meets with patients, works with them on their treatment plans. She said it takes up most of the day, and that she tries to leave everything at work before going home. Then she said something that sat wrong with me immediately. She said that a healthy work-life balance is very important in this kind of job, that some things can haunt you if you do not take proper care of yourself. I nodded, but I was uncomfortable. The word haunt felt out of place. I understand that the work is difficult, that it involves people who have done terrible things and who carry trauma and dysfunction in ways that are hard to witness. But the way she said it, the tone, the choice of word, it felt heavier than it should have. I tried to move past it. I asked her about her education, what she liked about the work, what her approach was. She told me she practices what she called psychodynamic therapy through hypnosis, which struck me as outdated. That is the kind of thing you read about in the history sections of textbooks. Methods that were popular when Freud was still taken seriously, and that have since been replaced by approaches with better evidence behind them. But she seemed confident in it, and I did not feel it was my place to question her. So I just nodded and tried to keep my expression neutral. She said she finds it helpful to get into the minds of her patients without roadblocks. I did not ask what she meant by that. I should have. Mr. Hiley returned, and after thanking Dr. Kendrick, I was brought to the cafeteria for lunch. I was anxious about eating in the same space as the inmates once they were out of their cells, but what I saw when we arrived was not what I expected. It was more orderly than any cafeteria I had ever been in. The men moved in a single file line, were served their food without speaking, and sat down at what seemed to be assigned seats. They ate in complete silence. No conversation, no sound except for the scrape of utensils against trays. I had never seen anything like it. I stood and stared, trying to make sense of what I was watching. I sat down at a random table, figuring I would not be approached or spoken to. A young man was sitting next to me, mousy and slight, not someone who looked like he belonged in a place like this. He was hitting his spoon against his tray repeatedly, louder than was necessary, and the sound grated on me. I glanced at him in irritation, and then looked down at his plate. In the mashed potatoes, he had written something that looked like the word help. I looked back up at him, and he was already staring at me with barely contained terror in his eyes. There were tears running down his face. Before I could say anything, he turned back to his tray and disturbed the letters he had written and started eating, shoveling the food into his mouth, while tears continued to fall into it. He did not seem to notice. I did not know what to do with what I had just seen. I told myself it was a prank, that the inmates were messing with the new intern, but I did not believe it. The alternative, whatever that was, felt too large to look at directly. I picked up my tray and moved back toward where Mr. Hiley was standing. As I stood beside him, I scanned the room and made eye contact with another inmate sitting across from where I was. His head was shaved, tattoos covering his scalp and running down his face and neck, disappearing under the collar of his jumpsuit. His eyes were wide, wider than I thought was physically possible, the whites of them stretching in a way that looked painful. He did not blink. He did not look away. He moved his eyes slightly in the direction of Mr. Haley standing next to me. I did not understand what he was trying to communicate, but I nodded. He held that eye contact for the rest of the lunch period. He kept eating mechanically, without looking at his tray, food disappearing into his mouth, while his eyes stayed locked on mine. Blood began to spread across the whites of his eyes, small vessels bursting, and tears formed at the corners but dried before they could fall. I could not look away. I do not know why. I think I wanted to, but something in me would not let me break the connection. It was only when the sound of movement started around us, the scraping of trays, the shuffling of feet, the hiss and static of walkie-talkies, that the moment ended. He blinked. Bloody tears ran down his face. He could not wipe them away because his hands were holding his tray. No one around him seemed to notice. Mr. Haley asked if I wanted to see his office, and I nodded because my throat was too tight to speak. We walked through more hallways until we reached his office, which was near Dr. Kendrick's. The walls were similarly bare. He explained the nature of his work while I stood and tried to listen, but my mind was still circling what had just happened. He gave me a small task to complete, while he handled something that required his attention, and I sat at a desk in the corner that looked like it had been set up hastily before my arrival. After finishing the task, I opened the computer and, out of boredom, started searching for information about the facility. There was nothing unusual. It was opened in December of 1884, and Mr. Hale had been the head warden since 2022. I wanted to find something that would explain what I had seen, but there was nothing. I decided the men I had encountered must have been part of the mental health caseload, and that I needed to stop thinking about it. I had 10 weeks left. I needed to hold it together. That was the first day. The longer I am here, the more I am learning that the things I saw were not isolated incidents. I needed to write this down somewhere and see if anyone else finds what I experienced as disturbing as I do. I will keep updating as things continue. Story 4. I have been hiking my whole life. When I was growing up, it was trips every month with my parents, and after I moved out, I started going solo every chance I could find the time. There has never been a period in my life where I felt afraid of the woods, or what might be in them. That changed after my most recent trip. I decided I wanted to try something longer than my usual 1 or 2 day outings. I had heard about a trail nearby within 50 miles or so that would take 4 days to complete. I had been living in the area for a couple of years and had never come across it before, but the person who told me about it had been hiking just as long as I had, so I trusted his information. He gave me the map he had printed to find the trailhead, and another, one of the trail itself, marked with notes from his own experience. After looking over what he had given me, it seemed perfect. Long stretches of unmarked hiking, a couple of ponds scattered throughout, lots of wildlife sightings noted in his handwriting along the margins. It was exactly the kind of trip I had been looking for, and I was excited to get started. It took a little time to arrange everything. I had to get the days off work, find someone to take care of my dog, and let a few people know where I would be and how long I planned to be gone. The hike did not look particularly challenging, but my parents had always drilled into me the importance of taking precautions in case something went wrong. Once all of that was sorted, I was ready to go. I loaded my gear into the car and set off on the 40-minute drive to the trailhead. The drive was short, and I did not have much trouble finding the spot, though the trail itself was not marked by anything official, just a red diamond nailed into a tree at the edge of the woods. I did not want to waste daylight, so I put my pack on immediately and started walking. The first few hours went incredibly well. The map I had been given matched the terrain perfectly. The sun was out, there was just enough breeze to keep me cool, and I felt good about the decision to come out here. When I noticed the sun beginning to drop, I found a spot about 100 feet off the trail and set up my tent and made a quick meal. While I was putting the tent together, I started to feel like something was off. I kept hearing twigs snapping, leaves moving, something that sounded like heavy breathing or huffing. None of that is particularly unusual when you are in the middle of the woods, surrounded by sticks and dry leaves. But there was something about it that my body was reacting to before my mind could catch up. I walked around the area after I finished setting up camp and did not see anything out of the ordinary. So I ate, hummed my food, and got into the tent. I needed to be up early for the first full day of hiking, and I would not be able to do that without sleep. A snapping sound woke me up. Whatever had made it was close. Within a few feet of the tent, I stayed completely still and listened. Another snap, then rustling in the leaves. There was definitely something right outside. I figured it was probably a deer or some other curious animal checking out the campsite. This did not seem like a heavily trafficked trail, so it made sense that my presence would draw attention from the local wildlife. I listened for a couple more minutes, and when the sound stopped, I started to drift back to sleep. Then I heard my name. It was not very clear. It did not sound like a person speaking, but I definitely heard it. Jason. I waited. It was not long before I heard it again. A long, drawn-out whisper. Jason. My heart rate spiked. I got dressed as quietly as I could, grabbed my flashlight and knife, and pushed out of the tent. At first, there was no one. I stood there breathing hard, staring into the dark mass of trees around me. I walked around the tent slowly, looking around every side, hoping I had imagined it, and I was relieved to find nothing. I told myself it was just the silence of the woods getting to me, and turned back toward the tent to get some sleep. The tent was unzipped. I had been so focused on getting out that I had forgotten to zip it back up. A stupid mistake that probably let all kinds of bugs inside, but that was not my main concern. I still had the flashlight on. I pointed it into the tent. There was something inside. Its skin was pale, stretched so tightly over its bones that it looked like it would tear at the slightest pressure. Its arms were long, reaching down past where its knees would have been, and its legs seemed to make up most of its torso. I could see its teeth, sharp and protruding through the skin of its upper lip, like they had grown too large to be contained. Its eyes were pale and did not look directly at me. It opened its mouth, and in a hoarse, strained voice, it said my name again. Jason. I ran. I did not stop, no matter how out of breath I got. I did not hear anything behind me except for the sound of my name being called, and even that grew fainter the further I went. Somehow, I made it back to my car. I had the keys in my pocket, which I was thankful for in a distant, numb kind of way, and I got in and drove home as fast as I could. I do not know what I saw. It was not an animal, it was not a person. Whatever it was, it knew my name. Story 5. When I was a kid, I loved going to the local park to play at the playground. I was a shy little guy all the way up until middle school, and always had trouble making regular conversation with kids in class or forming genuine connections. But for whatever reason, going to the local park made my shyness disappear. At the park, you did not really have to work to make friends. You just showed up and played. Shared interests or hobbies did not matter when you were playing pirates or space adventure. Nobody has time to ask you your favorite color during an impending Martian invasion. The Jump Park playground was a sprawling wooden fortress of 90s ingenuity. A giant field of mulch hosted the coolest structure my 9-year-old self had ever seen. A multi-level wooden castle rose from the center of the park, with tall wooden steeples reaching as if to eclipse the sun. The tallest of them boasted a little ladder, where kids brave enough could climb to the top and ride the giant twisting slide down to the sand pit below. From the central fort rope bridges and jungle gyms, branched out to smaller but still impressive wooden structures in all directions. Some had slides and seesaws, others had rope ladders and netting to climb. Meanwhile, the ground between the structures was littered with an array of swings, giant tires, and pipe tunnels. It was a lawsuit waiting to happen, but that was something the parents could worry about. Us kids were just there to have fun. If you did not get the occasional splinter or slide burn, well, maybe you were not playing hard enough. Sure, getting a surprise sting from a stray hornet trying to nest in the wood really sucked, but the experience of disappearing into your own fantasy was worth the risk. One Saturday, in the early days of summer, my parents had taken me to the park to play. The park was pretty empty for how nice of a day it was, and the whole playground was filled with just a handful of kids, myself included. My buddy Chris, another regular at the park, and I were playing Temple Explorer. Chris's parents had given him one of those cheap, disposable cameras, and we were going around digging for treasure and taking pictures of the ruins we had discovered, all while doing our best Indiana Jones impressions. We were on the 3rd level of the main fort when we heard a yell from behind us. "Who dares disturb my temple?" Another little boy I was less familiar with roared, poking his head up from the ladder leading to the 2nd level. "Run," Chris shrieked, and we booked it toward the ladder leading to the giant slide, the new boy hot on our heels. Our sense of urgency was slightly delayed by the single-person nature of the slide, as we started our daring escape from the temple monster. I like to think that we had pretty good imaginations for elementary kids, but at the end of the day, most of our adventures were just glorified games of tag. We would spend some time exploring or role-playing, but whether it was pirates or aliens, there were ultimately always 2 factions: the runners and the chasers. Chris hit the ground first, soon followed by myself. "We have to make it to the plane," he yelled just as our pursuer was starting his descent. The footsteps of the temple monster rattled behind us as we made our way to the little corner seesaw that was acting as our getaway plane. You had to pick something at the edge of the park to be the safe zone, otherwise it just was not fun. We had gotten a pretty good head start, but man, this kid was fast. "Let us split up," I yelled, turning to climb the rope ladder back onto one of the wooden forts and make my way to the seesaw from there. Chris kept beelining it on the ground, but had to abruptly change paths when a second kid decided being a monster looked fun and jumped in front of him, blocking the way with a roar. I was on the bridge connecting to the structure nearest the seesaw when Chris ran under me. I paused to see him make his way to the minefield of giant tires on the ground. Smart guy that Chris was. A lot of the kids were wary of the tires in the summer because they had a tendency to be a nesting ground for bees and other nasty critters. The other kid decided he did not want to play anymore and gave up the pursuit. Unfortunately for me, that little pause was all the other monster needed to catch up to me. I felt hands on my shoulders, followed by a gleeful gotcha. I was not making it home to tell the tale of my adventures in the temple today. Getting caught meant one thing. I was now a monster too. A monster that had just seen where Chris ran off to hide. Smiling, I told my new compatriot to go guard the escape route. I would flush Chris out of hiding. "I am coming to get you," I called out as I approached the tire jungle. I had to let Chris know I was after him in case he did not see me get caught. Otherwise, I was basically cheating, and that was lame. I glanced around and saw his head peek around the corner of one of the upright monster tires before running further into the maze. I hurried after him and made it around the corner, just in time to see him dive into one of the big tires laying on the ground. Too slow, I thought to myself as I crept closer and closer, taking my sweet time looking around to savor my moment of triumph. Finally, I made it to the tire that Chris had dove into and took a deep breath. "You are one of us now," I screamed, reaching in to grab the boy, but to my surprise, Chris was gone. I looked inside the tire, then looked all around again. There was no way he got away. I saw him get in the tire and hide. He had to be there. Finally, I stepped over the wide wall of rubber and into the middle of the tire myself. I was not quite the scaredy cat that the other kid was, but I had to admit I was a little wary of getting bitten by a spider. Inside the tire, I grew more confused, spinning on my hands and knees in a circle, trying to find my hidden friend. I was just about to get up when the ground beneath me shifted and opened up, plummeting me into the darkness below. Shakily, I got to my feet. My elbows and knees had gotten scraped up, but overall, I was no worse for wear. Light shone in from the opening above me, illuminating the small dirt tunnel I now stood in. The flimsy wooden trapdoor I had fallen through swayed, causing the light to shift and cast long shadows down the path. Looking down the tunnel, I could see the flickering light of a candle illuminating the end of the passage. I am not sure if it was adrenaline from the fall or curiosity, but for whatever reason, I found myself plunging into the darkness, eager to see what awaited at the end. Moving through the tunnel, I quickly realized I had underestimated just how big it was. As I walked toward the candlelight, other openings began to branch off the wall, each with its own tiny speck of light dotting the corridor, just enough for someone to find their way. I ignored these branching paths, not feeling adventurous enough to go too deep, and continued onward. Drawing nearer to the candle at the end, I started to grow more uncomfortable with the space around me. I felt like it was closing in on me, like I was not alone. A small wave of fear washed over me, and I came to a stop. That is when I heard it. Further behind me in the cave, the unmistakable plop of a single footstep on dirt. I turned behind me and saw that a black veil had fallen over the passageway. Somebody had closed the trapdoor that illuminated my entrance. "Chris," I called out, a tremble in my voice. I was met with the rushing sound of plopping footsteps drawing closer to me from the dark. I turned and ran as fast as my little legs could carry me. Luckily, the passage did not end at the candle, and I was able to keep going. I ran mindlessly through the tunnels, turning down passage after passage. Behind me, candles began flickering out as I ran, and eventually I was moving blind, running through complete darkness. I had just turned another corner when I ran smack first into Chris. The boy screamed at the impact, the disposable camera we had been playing with flashing in his hands before clattering to the ground. The sudden burst of light sent stars and after images through my eyes, but I could still see the look on Chris's face as his pupils dilated with pure terror. "Run!" I screamed, as we turned and ran off further into the darkness, our fun game of imagination having turned sinister and too real. We ran and we ran for what felt like miles, our little hearts racing with panic and exertion. Then I saw it. Chris had just stepped past when I tugged his arm down a side passage that offered a glimmer of light. He yelped as I pulled him in, and we sprinted for the tiny ray of hope shining down from the ceiling. Drawing close, we found another trapdoor, this one pockmarked with holes, allowing in our rays of salvation. Frantically, we climbed the little handholds and flipped it open, flailing back into the light of day and slamming the door shut behind us. We both lay on the ground panting for a moment before running off to our parents. The worst part about being a kid is the lack of credibility. When Chris and I spilled our story to our parents, they laughed it off and told us how imaginative we were. Chris even got scolded for losing his camera. I begged and begged my mom to believe me, even eventually convinced her to come see the trapdoor and the tires. But when we went to investigate, I could not get it to open. It was like I was hitting solid ground. There was only so much I could do with no proof, and eventually we went home for the evening. I kind of retreated into myself for a few weeks after that. Mom tried to take me out to play, but I did not want to go to the park anymore. It got to the point where she was begging me to go with her instead of the other way around. Eventually, enough time went by, and I relented. I had been getting lonely without seeing Chris or the other kids. I was wary when I stepped back into the park again, but Chris was there waiting for me. I think our parents had gotten in contact and decided we both needed some exposure therapy. With a familiar face, I quickly found myself relaxing, and we were playing just like old times. Mom had bought me a cool Tonka dump truck, and we spent a good portion of the day in the sand pit, hauling and dumping loads of dirt, before eventually climbing to the top of the tower to play on the huge slide. Chris and I ended up having a great time, and I found myself sad to leave again when it was time to go home. Walking back to the car, I noticed something tucked into the hinge of my truck bed. "What you got there, sweetie?" Mom asked when she noticed I had stopped walking. I stood still behind her, looking at the photograph that had been left for me. When my mom saw it, her face went white, and she snatched it away from me. Jump Park closed the following week. After finding the photograph, Mom had immediately called the police, and I spent the next day doing the best I could to recount my story about the tunnels. The local PD combed the park and eventually broke through the trap door in the tires. They found the tunnels as I had described and traced them to many more trapdoors scattered around the entirety of the park. They found antechambers within the tunnels, containing old jars of pickled food, burnt candles, and rope. They found a small room tucked away in the furthest reach of the tunnel system, fully bare save for a stained, rotting mattress. However, they did not find the gangly man that stood hunched behind me in the photo, his emaciated arm grasping at the back of my head that sat just out of reach. Story 6. When I was a kid, the local park was the one place where I didn't feel awkward. I was painfully shy growing up. Talking to kids in class felt like trying to solve a puzzle without knowing the rules. I never knew when to jump into a conversation or what to say to keep one going. But at the park, none of that mattered. You didn't need small talk when you were escaping lava or fighting off space invaders. You just ran, climbed, shouted, and suddenly you belonged. Jump Park was legendary to us. It was one of those massive wooden playgrounds built in the 90s, all sharp edges and questionable safety decisions. A huge mulch field held a towering wooden castle in the center. It had multiple levels, tall steeples, rope bridges, net climbs, and that giant twisting slide that dumped you into a sand pit at the bottom. Smaller forts branched out in every direction, connected by shaky bridges and climbing structures. The ground was scattered with swings, seesaws, pipe tunnels, and giant tractor tires arranged in clusters. It was absolutely a lawsuit waiting to happen, but we didn't care. Splinters and slide burns were badges of honor. Even the occasional hornet sting wasn't enough to keep us away. The playground was a kingdom, and we ruled it. One Saturday early in the summer, my parents dropped me off there like they often did. The park was surprisingly empty for such a nice day. Only a handful of kids were scattered around the structures. My friend Chris was there, which immediately made the day better. He had one of those disposable cameras his parents gave him, and we decided we were temple explorers uncovering ancient ruins. We climbed the 3rd level of the main fort, taking pictures of artifacts and narrating our adventure like we were in an Indiana Jones movie. That's when we heard a voice from below. "Who dares disturb my temple?" A boy we didn't know very well popped his head up from the ladder to the 2nd level, roaring dramatically. "Run!" Chris yelled. We bolted toward the ladder that led to the giant slide, the new kid chasing us. The slide slowed our escape because it was single file, but we were laughing so hard it didn't matter. Looking back, most of our elaborate storylines always boiled down to the same thing. 2 sides. The runners and the chasers. Chris hit the ground first, and I came flying down right after him. "We have to make it to the plane," he shouted. The plane was a little seesaw at the edge of the park. You always needed a safe zone far enough away to make the chase interesting. We had a decent head start, but the kid chasing us was fast. "Let's split up," I yelled, veering off and climbing a rope ladder back onto one of the connected structures. Chris kept running on the ground, but another kid jumped in front of him, growling and blocking his path. Chris swerved and headed straight for the giant tractor tires. A lot of kids avoided the tires in the summer. Bees loved nesting in them, and nobody wanted to get stung. The second kid gave up and stopped chasing. I made the mistake of pausing on a rope bridge to watch Chris weave into the maze of tires. That pause cost me. Hands grabbed my shoulders. "Gotcha!" I was now a monster. Smiling, I told the other kid to guard the seesaw. I would flush Chris out. "I'm coming to get you," I shouted as I approached the tire jungle. I had to warn him. If he didn't know I'd been tagged, it would be cheating. I saw him duck behind one of the upright tires before darting deeper into the maze. I followed and reached the corner just in time to see him dive into one of the large tires lying flat on the ground. Too slow, I thought, creeping closer and savoring my victory. "You're one of us now," I yelled, reaching into the tire. But Chris wasn't there. I froze. I had seen him dive in. There was nowhere else he could have gone. Confused, I stepped over the thick rubber edge and into the center of the tire. I knelt down and looked around, turning in a circle. The ground shifted. Before I could react, the dirt beneath me gave way and I dropped into darkness. I hit hard, scraping my elbows and knees, but nothing felt broken. I looked up. Light poured down from the opening above. A thin wooden trapdoor swayed slightly, letting in daylight. I was standing in a dirt tunnel. At the end of the passage, I saw the flicker of candlelight. I should have climbed out immediately. Instead, I walked forward. The tunnel was larger than I expected. As I moved toward the candle, more passages branched off, each marked by tiny, distant points of light. I ignored them and kept walking straight. The air felt tight, heavy, like I was being watched. I stopped. Behind me in the darkness, I heard it, a soft, wet plop of a footstep in dirt. I turned. The light from the trapdoor vanished. Someone had closed it. "Chris?" I called, my voice shaking. The plopping footsteps came again, closer this time. I ran. The tunnel continued past the candle, stretching deeper into the earth. I turned blindly down passage after passage. As I ran, the candles behind me flickered out one by one, until I was sprinting through complete darkness. I turned a corner and slammed face first into Chris. He screamed. The disposable camera in his hands flashed, lighting up the tunnel in a burst of white. For a split second I saw his face. Pure terror. "Run!" I shouted. We ran together, stumbling in the dark, hearts pounding. After what felt like forever, I spotted a faint beam of light from a side passage. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward it. At the end was another trapdoor, this one drilled with small holes that let daylight stream through. We scrambled up the handholds and shoved it open, spilling back into the park. We slammed it shut and lay on the ground gasping before running to our parents. They laughed. They told us we had vivid imaginations. Chris got scolded for losing his camera. I begged my mom to believe me. She finally walked over to the tire with me, but when I tried to open the trapdoor again, it wouldn't budge. It felt like solid ground. Over the next few weeks, I refused to go back to the park. My mom tried to encourage me, but I stayed home. Eventually, loneliness won out. When I returned, Chris was already there. We slipped back into our usual games. By the end of the day, I had almost convinced myself it had been some kind of shared hallucination. As we walked to the car, I noticed something tucked into the hinge of my Tonka truck. "What do you have there?" my mom asked. I stopped. It was a photograph. When my mom saw it, her face drained of color. She snatched it from my hands. Jump Park closed the next week. After my mom called the police, they searched the playground thoroughly. They broke open the tire trap door and uncovered the tunnel system exactly as I described. There were multiple entrances hidden around the park. Inside they found jars of preserved food, burnt candles, coils of rope, and small side rooms hollowed out of dirt. In the furthest chamber, they found a single stained mattress on the ground. but they never found the man from the photograph. The photo showed me standing in the tire maze, smiling mid-game. Behind me, just inches out of my awareness, was a tall, emaciated man hunched low. His long, skeletal arm reached toward the back of my head, and his face was close enough that he could have whispered in my ear. Story 7. Something happened to me last week and I cannot shake it. I have tried telling other people about it, but everyone keeps explaining it away. They say I was tired. They say I dreamed it. They say new mothers hear things. Maybe writing it out will help me make sense of it, because right now, I cannot. It was a normal Friday. I made dinner for Jack, my husband, and for myself, while Junior, our newborn, slept in his bassinet. Jack works nights, so he had been napping before his shift. When dinner was ready, I woke him up and we ate together. Junior woke briefly, so I fed him and we spent some time together as a family before Jack had to leave for work. I kissed my husband goodbye at the door. I remember that clearly. I remember the smell of his cologne, the way he squeezed my shoulder before stepping out into the dark. After he left, I fed Junior one more time and put him down in his crib. I crawled into bed with a book, but I was so exhausted I barely made it through 2 pages before falling asleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the familiar sound of Junior fussing. That soft rising cry that starts small and quickly builds. I rolled out of bed, pulled on my bathrobe, and went to the kitchen to warm a bottle. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I warmed the bottle, walked down the hallway, and lifted Junior from his crib. I sat in the rocking chair in his room and fed him. The chair makes a soft crackling sound when it moves, almost like faint static. I have grown used to it. I rocked back and forth and hummed under my breath until Junior's cries softened into quiet swallowing sounds. After he finished the bottle, I kept rocking him for a few more minutes until he drifted back to sleep. I placed him gently in his crib, stood there for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall, then went back to my room. I dropped my robe on the corner of the bed and slid under the sheets. After months of broken sleep, I fall asleep instantly now. I do not even remember closing my eyes. It felt like only a few minutes passed before I woke again. My alarm clock read just past 5 a.m. I immediately assumed Junior was hungry again. That has been our rhythm lately. I sat up, reached for my robe, and slipped it on. That is when I heard it. Not Junior crying. The rocking chair. It was unmistakable, that same soft crackling rhythm. Back and forth, and over it, a voice, a lullaby. Soft, gentle, a man's voice. For a moment, I froze. Then relief washed over me. Jack must have come home early. Sometimes when he gets home from his shift, he checks on Junior before coming to bed. I thought maybe he had decided to give me a break. The idea made my chest feel warm. I had been so tired lately. I stepped quietly into the hallway and leaned against the wall outside Junior's room. The door was cracked open. I could not see inside from where I stood, but I could hear everything clearly. The rocking, the singing. It was beautiful. I do not know the melody, but it sounded old, almost like something from another time. Slow and soothing. Junior was not crying. There was no fussing, just the lullaby and the steady rhythm of the chair. I remember smiling. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Fatigue overtook me. I thought, he has it handled. I can sleep for a few more minutes. So I went back to bed and closed my eyes. The next time I woke, it was around 8 a.m. I heard dishes clinking in the kitchen. I also heard Junior making those happy little cooing sounds he does in the mornings. I got out of bed, still in my robe, and shuffled to the kitchen. Jack was at the stove, scrambling eggs. Junior was in his baby seat on the counter beside him. Everything looked perfectly normal. "Good morning," I said, kissing Jack on the cheek. He smiled. "Morning." I took over feeding Junior his bottle while Jack finished breakfast. As I sat down, I thanked him. "For what?" he asked casually. "For last night. For getting up with Junior." He looked over his shoulder at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" I laughed a little, thinking he was joking. "The lullaby, the rocking, around 5. He turned off the stove and faced me fully. "I wasn't home at 5, he said slowly. "I worked overtime. I just got back about 30 minutes ago." I felt something drop inside me. I told him I heard him. I heard the rocking chair. I heard him singing. I told him I leaned against the wall and listened. He shook his head. "I don't even know any lullabies," he said. "You know that." He looked genuinely concerned at first, then frustrated when I insisted. He said I was exhausted, that new moms hallucinate sometimes, that maybe I dreamed it between sleep cycles. He pointed out that Junior was extremely hungry this morning, which would make sense if he had not been fed at 5. But that is the part that does not make sense. If Junior had been hungry, he would have screamed, "He does not skip feedings quietly." And I heard no crying. I heard him being rocked. I heard someone sing. It was not me. It was not Jack. Everyone I tell says the same thing. You were dreaming. You were sleep deprived. It was the house settling. It was your imagination. But I know the difference between a dream and standing awake in my hallway with my hand on the wall. And I know what our rocking chair sounds like. I have not slept properly since. Every night now when Junior wakes, I listen before I move. I lie there in the dark and wait. So far, I have not heard it again, but sometimes, when I am rocking him myself, I catch a faint scent that does not belong in the room. Something old, like dust and cold air. And once, just once, when I stopped rocking, the chair moved one more time, on its own. Story 8. I know this sounds unbelievable. I know how it sounds when you put it into words. But I have never felt this kind of dread before, and it has been building for months. My family has always said I am sensitive. Since I was little, I have seen things in the corner of my eye, dark shapes moving just outside of focus. When I turn my head to look, they are gone. I can usually tell immediately what kind of presence it is. Some feel normal, almost like the way you feel when someone walks into a room. Calm, neutral. Others feel heavy, wrong, like pressure pushing down on your chest. The ones that feel safe do not scare me. I have always thought of them as protectors, spirits that simply never left. I respect them. I do not try to disturb them. But the heavy ones, I do not acknowledge them. I have always believed that if I think too much about them, if I give them attention, they notice. And if they notice, they come closer. Our house is about 30 years old. There is an old woman's spirit here. We call her Lady Might. She feels neutral, steady, like she belongs. Even though we legally own the house, we have always joked that she owns it spiritually. In the other house on our compound, where my grandmother, aunt, and uncle live, there is a young boy's spirit. He died years ago. He was neglected when he was sick and did not survive. My uncle knew him when they were children. They used to play together. When the boy died, my uncle was devastated. He told me once that he still felt guilty because he would bring him food and water when they played, but he could not stop him from getting sicker. I have only directly seen them a few times. The boy once appeared almost translucent, like water shaped into a child, sitting quietly on the second floor of my grandmother's house. That floor is rarely used. 2 bedrooms and a big living room, mostly empty. He was just sitting on the floor. I have felt him in the attic many times, but that was the only time I clearly saw him. Lady Might appeared once in our bathroom storage area, floating, a pale white figure, calm, not threatening. I always believed houses needed neutral spirits like them, that they act like a kind of protection, a barrier against darker things. Then my dad moved back in with us. My parents are not together anymore, but they are co-parenting. He is similar to me in some ways. He has had his own spiritual experiences when he worked as a security guard, but he does not believe in coexisting peacefully with spirits. One night he told my mom and me that he told Lady Might she could walk into the light now because he was here. He said it like he was doing us a favor. After that, things changed. In October 2025, my young cousin died from complications of Crohn's disease and dengue. During the week of mourning, my healthy, spoiled, overweight cat died suddenly. No illness, no warning. In March 2026, my younger cat died the same way. Then my uncle's cat, then a kitten, then our brown family dog, then my uncle's teenage dog, one after another. They were not old, they were not visibly sick. We considered maybe a virus, but nothing else matched. We have had pets for years without issues. Now we went from 5 cats and 5 dogs to 2 cats and 4 dogs. Before he died, my uncle's dog would howl every night at 3 in the morning. Not playful howling. It sounded like weeping. Around the same time, the people in the house started feeling worse too. I began getting migraines frequently. My dad barely sleeps anymore. My mom complains of body pain constantly. We tell ourselves it is stress, grief, coincidence. I tried to stop thinking about it. I know thinking about things gives them shape. I know attention strengthens them. But writing this down, remembering all of it at once, I feel that heaviness again. It feels closer. And the part that frightens me most is something I have not told anyone. When my dad said he told Lady Might to leave, I felt something like a door open. Not a door in the house, a door in the air. Something stepped into the space she used to fill. I have not seen it clearly, only shadows stretching longer than they should. Only the feeling of being watched from directly behind me, even when I am alone. Tonight, while writing this, the house feels too quiet. I realized I have not checked on the animals in a while. There is something wrong about the numbers. They are not even. And whatever this is, it does not like imbalance. Story 9. I'm a self-employed contractor from Russia. I've been in construction and finishing work for years. I usually work alone. It's easier that way. No need to split the pay, no arguments, no delays. Recently, I was contacted through a middleman and offered a job to finish a project after another crew had left. The pay was high, higher than normal. The only condition was that it would be off the books. I didn't like that part, but I needed the money. In this industry, you learn not to ask too many questions as long as you're paid on time. So I agreed. The building was on the outskirts of the city. Not industrial, not residential either. Just one of those gray zones where empty lots and half-finished developments sit next to new business complexes. The structure itself was already built. My job was interior finishing tiles, ceiling, surface prep. Simple work technically. The first thing that bothered me happened before I even stepped inside. There was a smell. It wasn't sewage. I know that smell. It wasn't mold. It wasn't dead animals. It was something chemical, but not sharp like bleach. It was faint, sour, like a green apple that's just starting to rot. Not strong enough to identify, but strong enough that your brain registers it and says, "This is wrong." Inside, the air felt too clean and too stale at the same time. Hard to explain. Like a hospital corridor that hasn't seen patients yet. On my first break, people call it a smoke break, but I don't smoke. I stepped outside to clear my head. That's when I saw him. A janitor walking across the courtyard toward another wing of the building. But he wasn't dressed like a normal janitor. He was wearing full protective gear. Hooded chemical suit, respirator, sealed goggles, thick gloves, and heavy rubber boots with reinforced toes. I've worked around hazardous sites before. I know what protective equipment looks like. Later that night, I checked the details through an AI just to be sure. It looked like level C protection. That means protection from chemical splashes, toxic dust, biological aerosols, things that float in the air and get into your lungs. Not full oxygen tanks, but serious protection. And here I was, working in regular clothes with basic gloves. If a janitor needs that kind of gear, it means the hazard is not theoretical. It means something in that building requires regular decontamination. The reinforced boots stuck in my head. You wear those when heavy things can fall, or when you're pushing equipment that can crush your feet, like gurneys, gas cylinders, lab containers, or bodies. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe another wing had chemical storage. Maybe it was an overreaction to some minor spill. I focused on my work. The layout of the building was strange. From the plans I saw, it was shaped like an H. 3 floors, 2 long wings connected by a central corridor. That design is common in psychiatric hospitals and research facilities. It allows isolation. Close one corridor and an entire wing becomes sealed off. I was assigned to a section on the first floor. Tiling work, floor-to-ceiling tiles, every wall covered. Seamless, easy to wash down. But there were no visible pipe outlets, no plumbing connections, no sewage openings, no drain holes. Nothing that would justify that level of waterproof finishing. In construction, that makes no sense. You tile bathrooms. You tile laboratories with active sinks. You tile morgues with drainage systems. But you do not tile an entire building with no water infrastructure unless the room is meant to be hosed down completely from outside sources. It felt wrong, not illegal by code, just illogical. While I worked, people passed through the corridors. White coats, clipboards, tablets. They rarely looked at me. When they did, it was like I was a chair, something temporary. One afternoon, I was resting near the stairwell when I heard voices echoing from somewhere above. The acoustics in that place were incredible. The high ceilings and hard surfaces turned the entire building into a sound tunnel. I couldn't see them, but I heard them clearly. To what extent must we enhance the children's cognitive functions? By 104%. But that's impossible. We are disregarding ethics this time. Last time was 89%. I remember standing there, frozen, holding my water bottle. I didn't understand what they meant. 104% of what? Intelligence doesn't work like that. I typed the lines into my phone exactly as I heard them. Later that day, another conversation drifted through the walls. Won't we hit the law of diminishing returns? The first improvements are dramatic, but after that, progress slows. No. Intensive sensory stimulation combined with deprivation. Genetic manipulation long-term. It provides stable cognitive growth in early stages. Stop exaggerating. What gene changes are we talking about? Editing genes responsible for neural connection growth. BDNF, for example. Even without understanding the terms, I knew this wasn't random conversation. When I got home and looked up BDNF, I found out it's real. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Connected to neuron growth and plasticity. Real science. That's when the paranoia started creeping in properly. Why hire a single independent contractor? Why not a registered company? Why pay in cash in 2026? Why no paperwork trail? On the fourth day, something happened that pushed me over the edge. I was working alone in that tiled section. The building was quiet, unusually quiet. No drilling from other crews, no loud voices, just distant footsteps and ventilation hum. And then music started playing somewhere above me. Cheerful, light, familiar. It took me a few seconds to recognize it. Want You Gone. The ending song from Portal 2. If you know the game, you understand why that's not comforting in the context of secret labs and unethical experiments. The lyrics are playful, but they're about an AI calmly talking about eliminating someone. In a normal office, it would be funny. In that sterile, tiled building with no drains, after overhearing conversations about children and genetic manipulation, it felt like a message. I only want you gone. The contrast made it worse. A happy melody in a wrong place is more disturbing than a scream. I stopped working. I stood there listening to it echo through the tile corridors. It sounded distant but clear, bouncing off surfaces like it was everywhere at once. I went straight to the guy who handled payments. He was the same man who had contacted me about the job. Calm, neutral expression. No small talk. I told him I needed to quit, that I wouldn't finish the 1-2 day contract. He said they would only pay 33%. I agreed immediately. That's what scared me. He didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't try to negotiate, just counted out cash and handed it to me. In cash. In 2026. No receipt, no transfer, no record. Usually, if someone owes you money in construction, they fight you over every ruble. Here it was like my portion was nothing. Like it didn't matter. Either their budget was enormous, or they knew I wouldn't need the rest. That thought stayed with me all the way home. When I got back, I checked my boots, my jacket, everything. I even asked an AI what to look for. It suggested checking for passive RFID tags hidden in seams or soles. I found nothing. Still, the fact that I had to consider that possibility tells you what state my mind was in. The building itself keeps replaying in my head. The bluish lobby, the dark brown doors, an inactive metal detector, and a turnstile at the entrance. A guard in his 30s, fit, maybe wearing a light vest under his uniform. He never spoke, just nodded. The place was too clean for an unfinished site. No cigarette butts, no trash, no dust except where I was actively working. High ceilings, polished surfaces, silence. Regular government buildings in my country always have some decay. Peeling paint, old wiring, smell of dust. This place looked funded, designed, controlled. High ceilings and tiled corridors create perfect sound travel. That's why I heard those conversations so clearly. The building was like an acoustic instrument. And here's the part that keeps bothering me most. If I heard them, then the place isn't as secure as they think. They hired one observant contractor and left him alone in a space where their voices traveled through vents and floor cavities. If their secrecy can be compromised by bad acoustics, what else have they miscalculated? Maybe nothing. Maybe they simply don't care. Maybe I wasn't important enough to worry about. I posted this because if something happens to me, at least there's a record. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it was a legal but classified research project. Maybe the conversations were theoretical discussions exaggerated by echo and stress. But the combination of things, the smell, the protective suits, the tiled rooms without plumbing, the H-shaped isolation layout, the cash payment, the music choice, together they form a pattern. Individually, each detail can be explained. Together, they feel like something else. People joke about aperture science and fictional labs, but real research facilities can be far stranger than games. And when ethics are disregarded, as I clearly heard, the line between science and nightmare gets thin very fast. Maybe I just walked into an advanced cognitive research center working on extreme neurological enhancement, or maybe I stumbled into something that should not exist at all. Either way, I took my 33% and left, and I don't plan on ever going back. Story 10. For 4 months, I stared out of my apartment window. After the accident, I didn't have much else to do. A shattered pelvis and 2 broken legs reduced my world to a small living room, a narrow hallway, and a view of another building across the street. I had always thought that view was boring. Just another concrete complex filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives. But when you are trapped in a wheelchair with too much time and too little hope, even ordinary lives become fascinating. At first, the immobility broke me. I did not adjust well to dependence. A caregiver came 3 times a week to help clean, cook, and handle the tasks I could not manage from my chair. She was kind, but every act of assistance felt like a reminder that I was no longer whole. I could roll myself from room to room. I could make coffee if I was careful, but the things I couldn't do haunted me. About 2 weeks into my recovery, I moved my chair to the window out of boredom. The apartment building across from mine stood close enough that with a cheap pair of binoculars, I could see clearly through several of its windows. I told myself I wasn't spying. I avoided bathrooms, avoided intimate moments. I observed life, nothing more. And life unfolded in frames like television screens. There was a mother and daughter who argued almost every night in their kitchen. A teenage girl who practiced guitar by the window, repeating the same chords until her fingers must have ached. An elderly man who painted enormous canvases in a sunlit studio. But then there was him. The first time I noticed his apartment, he was sitting beside a hospital bed set up in his bedroom. A woman lay there, unmoving, a ventilator tube fixed in her mouth. Even from across the street, I could see the yellow tint of her skin. Organ failure. I had seen it before. When my own mother was dying, the man looked to be in his 40s, always dressed in a suit, even inside his own home. When he wasn't seated beside his wife, holding her hand or bowing his head in prayer, he was in the other room, hunched over a computer. An orange cat trailed him everywhere, brushing against his legs. Sometimes he stroked it absent-mindedly. Sometimes he pushed it away without looking. 2 large windows gave me a clear view. One framed the bedroom. The other showed what had once been a dining room, but had been converted into some kind of computer workspace. At first, I pitied him. He prayed for hours. I could see his lips moving. I could see the exhaustion in his posture, but something about the amount of time he spent at that computer unsettled me. It wasn't casual use, it was obsession. Over the next few weeks, the room changed. Silver cables began to appear. Thick, industrial ones, not the thin modern wires you buy at an electronics store. They crawled across the walls and floor like metal vines. Black boxes stacked in corners. Old monitors with bulky frames flickered with bright green text and occasional anatomical images. The equipment looked outdated, heavy, pixelated displays, tangled cords. It felt like looking into a laboratory from decades ago. And there were books, piles of old brown volumes stacked around his desk, leather-bound, worn at the edges. He would sit surrounded by them, flipping pages, then turning back to the glowing screens. The sight followed me into my sleep. What was he building? Why did he need diagrams of the human body? Why did his wife's room remain dimly lit while the other room glowed green deep into the night? Around the 2nd month, the atmosphere shifted from strange to sinister. One night, at 2 a.m, I sat by the window, unable to sleep. He was in the computer room again, struggling to attach a thick red cable to a towering computer tower that stood nearly as tall as his desk. The apartment lights were off. Only orange candles illuminated the space, their flames flickering against the cables and machines. The room looked less like a workspace and more like a ritual chamber. He left the room briefly. When he returned, he was holding the orange cat in one hand and a knife in the other. The cat did not move. Even from that distance, I could see it was dead. He laid it carefully on the desk and spread its limbs. I wanted to look away. I should have looked away, but my body would not move. He cut into the animal with methodical precision. I saw glimpses through the binoculars, gloved hands, dark blood, metal tools, and then I saw him thread thin cables into the open body, attaching them to organs like grotesque surgical sutures. I dropped the binoculars at some point. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. But before I turned from the window completely, I looked one last time. The cat's eyes opened. They were glassy and wrong, but they opened. The next morning, I rushed to the window, exhausted and shaking. The cat was gone, The man was dragging the thick red cable from the computer room into the bedroom. He followed it with several silver ones and pieces of equipment I could not identify. Then he boarded up the bedroom window from the inside. I lost my view of his wife. Minutes later, he passed through the computer room wearing an apron, long gloves, and a face mask. A duffel bag hung from his shoulder. He entered the bedroom and closed the door. I called my brother in a panic. I told him everything. He thought I was spiraling from isolation and pain medication. He accused me of hallucinating. For a moment, I considered calling the police, but in my city, the police were not people you involved lightly. And what would I say? That I had been spying on my neighbor and saw him connect wires to his sick wife? So I waited. Month 3 arrived. My bones had healed, but I had to relearn how to walk. The doctor told me it would take months before I could move independently. I pushed myself harder than I should have. Between therapy sessions, I kept watch. Sometimes I saw him pass through the computer room, sleeves stained dark. Sometimes I saw nothing at all. Eventually, he boarded up that window too. By month 4, I could limp with a cane. I studied the building across from me and counted windows, measured distances. I traced the layout in my mind. 13th floor, apartment 1333, Ocean View Complex. One afternoon, against medical advice and common sense, I left my apartment. Crossing the street felt like crossing into another world. The lobby of the Ocean View Complex was vast and strangely quiet. The ceiling soared higher than seemed architecturally reasonable. A thick purple carpet covered the floor. The silence pressed against my ears. I pressed the elevator button. Inside stood an elderly woman, dressed entirely in black. She did not look at me. She did not respond to my greeting. Several floors lit up as we ascended, but she never moved. When the number 13 glowed above the door, I stepped out as quickly as my weak legs allowed. The hallway stretched in both directions, long and identical. The air felt still, too still. I found apartment 1333. The door was slightly open. I entered. The entryway floor was covered in white symbols painted around clusters of orange candles. The walls bore the same markings, written in a language I did not recognize. The smell inside was metallic and sweet. I moved through the doorway into the computer room. It was suffocating. Cables twisted across every surface. Black boxes hummed faintly. Candles filled every gap between the machines. On the largest monitor, bright green text filled the screen in dense paragraphs. I took a picture with my phone without reading it. The red and silver cables all flowed in one direction, through the bedroom door. I pushed it open. The room was worse than anything I had imagined. His wife lay in the hospital bed, still attached to the ventilator. Blood stained the sheets. Cables pierced her skin at dozens of points. They were not simply attached, they were embedded, sewn along her arms and legs, threaded beneath flesh like metal veins. Symbols were carved into the insulation of the wires. The cables pulsed faintly, as though carrying something more than electricity. Her skin was pale now. Not yellow, healthy pale. Organ failure does not reverse itself. A brown leather book lay open on the bedside table. Diagrams of the human body were paired with ritualistic symbols. Instructions, procedures, a fusion of anatomy and something older. For a moment, I wondered if he had succeeded. If whatever monstrous experiment he was conducting had actually restored her failing organs. Then I looked at her face. Her eyes were open. They were not focused, not human. They tracked nothing in the room, yet seemed aware of something I could not see. I thought of my mother, of the machines that kept her breathing, of the things I had wished I could undo. I stepped to the ventilator. My hands shook. I turned it off. The machine gave a long mechanical sigh. The rhythm slowed, then stopped. The faint pulsing in the cables flickered once and went still. I did not wait. I left the apartment, the hallway, the elevator. The elderly woman in black was still inside when the doors opened. She looked at me this time. She smiled. I stumbled back to my own building and collapsed inside my apartment. For weeks afterward, I watched his windows. They remained boarded. No movement. No light. I never saw him again. Almost every night since, I have studied the photograph I took of his computer screen. It was not code. It was a letter. "Dearest Susan," it began. He wrote of Sunday drives and picnics, of prayers unanswered, of begging God to cure her cancer and hearing nothing in return. "In the absence of God," he wrote, "I looked elsewhere." He described studying anatomy, researching technology, and diving into scriptures others would call blasphemous. "I will not stop," he wrote. "I will do everything I can to save you." He signed it, "Yours always, Mark." I do not know whether I saved her from something worse or destroyed the only chance he believed he had left. Sometimes, late at night, when I sit by the window, I think I see a faint flicker of orange light behind those boarded panels. And sometimes, in the silence of my apartment, I hear something that sounds like a cat scratching at my door. Story 11. I am a medical doctor, a forensic pathologist. A few months ago, I accepted my first official position at a large county morgue beneath a major hospital complex. After years of medical school, residency, sleepless nights, and endless examinations, I finally had something stable. Predictable hours. Predictable work. Death is many things, but in a professional setting, it is consistent. The morgue is located in the basement level of the hospital. No windows, no natural light, just stainless steel tables, tiled floors, fluorescent lights that hum faintly overhead, and the ever-present smell of disinfectant layered over formaldehyde. Cold air circulates constantly, keeping everything preserved and still. There are only 3 of us who work there during the day: the senior medical examiner, myself, and the janitor. The senior examiner is efficient and distant. She speaks only when necessary, her tone always precise and clinical. She reviews files in her office, signs reports, and rarely lingers in the autopsy suite longer than required. The janitor is different. He is an old man, deeply wrinkled, his skin like cracked leather. His posture is hunched, shoulders curved forward, as if carrying a weight no one else can see. His gray maintenance uniform hangs loosely from his thin frame. He moves slowly, dragging a mop bucket down the long corridors, eyes down, saying nothing. He cleans the floors, wipes down our tables after examinations, empties biohazard containers. He never makes conversation. At first, I saw him as part of the background. Every hospital has someone like him. Quiet, invisible. Within 3 weeks, I realized he was not invisible at all. The morgue has a viewing room for families. It is the hardest room in the building. Families are brought down to identify bodies or to say their final goodbyes. I have trained myself to detach from death itself, but raw grief is another matter entirely. The sound of a parent seeing their child's body for the first time is something that settles in your bones. One afternoon, we received a young man who had died in a motorcycle accident. His parents arrived within the hour. Through the thick wooden door of the viewing room, I could hear the mother's screams echoing down the hallway. It was primal. It was the sound of something inside a human being tearing open. I stood at the desk, filling out paperwork, feeling that familiar heaviness in my chest. The janitor shuffled down the corridor with his mop bucket. He stopped outside the viewing room. He leaned the mop against the wall and quietly pushed the door open. He stepped inside. I frowned. It seemed inappropriate. I almost followed him in to ask him to give the family space. Then the screaming stopped. It did not fade. It did not dissolve into quiet sobbing. It stopped. Within seconds. The silence was so sudden, it felt artificial. About a minute later, the janitor exited the room, picked up his mop, and continued down the hallway. Soon after, the parents came out. I braced myself for devastation, but they did not look devastated. Their eyes were clear, the mother's cheeks were dry. The father held her gently, and both wore expressions of deep, settled calm. Not numbness, not shock, peace. They thanked the receptionist softly and left. You do not recover from losing a child in 2 minutes. Over the next month, I saw it happen again and again. Different families, different tragedies, the same pattern, intense, unbearable grief, the janitor entering, a minute of low, indistinct whispering, silence, then peace. I tried to listen once, standing near the door. All I could hear was a low murmur, syllables thick and unfamiliar, rhythmic in tone, not English, not any language I recognized. I asked the senior examiner about it one afternoon. She did not look up from her paperwork. He has a gift for comforting the bereaved, she said flatly. Leave him to his work. There was no room for further discussion. The other rule was even stranger. No one stays in the morgue past 6 in the evening. Officially, it is due to reduced ventilation and energy conservation. That explanation is false. The power remains on. The refrigeration units hum steadily all night. The real rule is simple. Medical staff must leave before nightfall. Only the janitor stays. I tested that rule during my 2nd month. After a highway pileup, we had a backlog of reports. I stayed at my desk past 5:30, typing autopsy notes. The senior examiner packed her bag and reminded me to leave before 6. I nodded. At exactly 6 o'clock, my office door opened. The janitor stood there, mop in hand. "It is time for you to go," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, wrong in a way I cannot fully describe. "I just need another hour," I replied. "I'll lock up." He stepped into the room. Calmly, without argument, he reached down and unplugged my computer from the wall. The screen went black. An hour of unsaved work vanished. I stood up, furious. Then I saw his face. His expression was blank, but something beneath it was coiled and dangerous. His eyes were darker than they should have been. Focused, predatory. "The work is done," he said slowly. "You leave now." I left. 3 days ago I broke the rule again. We had received the body of a young woman who died suddenly from an undiagnosed cardiac condition. Her family arrived in a large group. The grief in that viewing room was overwhelming. The janitor entered. Silence followed. I decided that day I would find out the truth. At 5:30, I pretended to leave. Instead, I slipped into an old storage room filled with outdated supplies and broken equipment. I hid behind a metal shelving unit and waited. 6 o'clock passed. The building settled into silence. Then I heard it, a metallic clank, the heavy squeal of refrigeration hinges, the cold storage room. I stepped into the dark hallway, lit only by green emergency exit signs. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain it would give me away. The cold room door was slightly open. I heard a wet, tearing sound and chewing. I looked inside. One of the refrigeration drawers was fully extended. The young woman's body lay on the metal tray. The janitor stood over her. His back faced me. Both arms were buried inside her abdominal cavity. There was no surgical incision, no tools. He had torn her open with his bare hands. He pulled something free with a wet, sucking sound. Her liver. He raised it to his mouth. His jaw opened wider than human anatomy allows. His teeth were black and jagged. He bit deeply into the organ, chewing loudly in the quiet room, swallowing chunks whole. I stepped backward in horror. My heel struck a biohazard bin. It crashed to the floor. The chewing stopped. A low growl filled the room. "Who is there?" he asked. I ran. I sprinted down the corridor, shoes slipping on tile. Behind me, the cold room door slammed open with violent force. His footsteps followed. They were fast. Too fast. I dove into the autopsy suite, scrambling behind an examination table. The swinging doors burst open. He entered. In the dim light, I saw him clearly. Blood covered his chest and chin. He stood taller than before, limbs elongated, fingers brushing the table edges. "You did not leave," he whispered. "You broke the rule." He walked slowly down the aisle between tables. I tried to crawl away. A massive, blood-soaked hand dropped from above and seized my shoulder. He lifted me effortlessly and hurled me across the room. I hit a metal cart and collapsed, breathless. He crouched over me. "Do you know what I am, doctor?" I shook my head. "I am a ghoul," he said calmly. "I consume the dead. I do not kill the living. That draws attention. I take only what is already lost." He explained the arrangement. He eats the livers, the richest organ, the essence. The senior examiner adjusts reports, missing tissue attributed to trauma or post-mortem damage. In exchange, he takes something else. "Their grief," he whispered. "When I consume the dead, I create a void. I whisper the ancient transaction and pull their sorrow into it. I swallow their agony. They leave with peace." It explained everything. The silence, the calm faces, the rule. "You are a loose thread now," he said. I begged. I offered compliance. I promised silence. He studied me for a long time. Then he leaned close to my ear. "If you speak," he whispered, "I will not wait for you to die." He released me. "Go home, doctor. The work is done." I have not returned in 3 days, but I must go back tomorrow. If I quit, I become unpredictable. If I run, I become suspicious. So I will return. I will process reports. I will sign paperwork. I will avoid the viewing room. And I will never, ever stay past 6 o'clock again. Story 12. I am a medical doctor, a forensic pathologist. A few months ago, I accepted my first official position at a large county morgue beneath a major hospital complex. After years of medical school, residency, sleepless nights, and endless examinations, I finally had something stable. Predictable hours. Predictable work. Death is many things, but in a professional setting, it is consistent. The morgue is located in the basement level of the hospital. No windows, no natural light, just stainless steel tables, tiled floors, fluorescent lights that hum faintly overhead, and the ever-present smell of disinfectant layered over formaldehyde. Cold air circulates constantly, keeping everything preserved and still. There are only 3 of us who work there during the day: the senior medical examiner, myself, and the janitor. The senior examiner is efficient and distant. She speaks only when necessary, her tone always precise and clinical. She reviews files in her office, signs reports, and rarely lingers in the autopsy suite longer than required. The janitor is different. He is an old man, deeply wrinkled, his skin like cracked leather. His posture is hunched, shoulders curved forward as if carrying a weight no one else can see. His gray maintenance uniform hangs loosely from his thin frame. He moves slowly, dragging a mop bucket down the long corridors, eyes down, saying nothing. He cleans the floors, wipes down our tables after examinations, empties biohazard containers. He never makes conversation. At first, I saw him as part of the background. Every hospital has someone like him, quiet, invisible. Within 3 weeks, I realized he was not invisible at all. The morgue has a viewing room for families. It is the hardest room in the building. Families are brought down to identify bodies or to say their final goodbyes. I have trained myself to detach from death itself, but raw grief is another matter entirely. The sound of a parent seeing their child's body for the first time is something that settles in your bones. One afternoon, we received a young man who had died in a motorcycle accident. His parents arrived within the hour. Through the thick wooden door of the viewing room, I could hear the mother's screams echoing down the hallway. It was primal. It was the sound of something inside a human being tearing open. I stood at the desk, filling out paperwork, feeling that familiar heaviness in my chest. The janitor shuffled down the corridor with his mop bucket. He stopped outside the viewing room. He leaned the mop against the wall and quietly pushed the door open. He stepped inside. I frowned. It seemed inappropriate. I almost followed him in to ask him to give the family space. Then the screaming stopped. It did not fade. It did not dissolve into quiet sobbing. It stopped. Within seconds, the silence was so sudden, it felt artificial. About a minute later, the janitor exited the room, picked up his mop, and continued down the hallway. Soon after, the parents came out. I braced myself for devastation, but they did not look devastated. Their eyes were clear, the mother's cheeks were dry. The father held her gently, and both wore expressions of deep, settled calm. Not numbness, not shock, peace. They thanked the receptionist softly and left. You do not recover from losing a child in 2 minutes. Over the next month, I saw it happen again and again. Different families, different tragedies, the same pattern. Intense, unbearable grief. The janitor entering. A minute of low, indistinct whispering. Silence. Then peace. I tried to listen once, standing near the door. All I could hear was a low murmur, syllables thick and unfamiliar, rhythmic in tone. Not English, not any language I recognized. I asked the senior examiner about it one afternoon. She did not look up from her paperwork. "He has a gift for comforting the bereaved," she said flatly. "Leave him to his work." There was no room for further discussion. The other rule was even stranger. No one stays in the morgue past 6 in the evening. Officially, it is due to reduced ventilation and energy conservation. That explanation is false. The power remains on. The refrigeration units hum steadily all night. The real rule is simple. Medical staff must leave before nightfall. Only the janitor stays. I tested that rule during my second month. After a highway pileup, we had a backlog of reports. I stayed at my desk past 5:30, typing autopsy notes. The senior examiner packed her bag and reminded me to leave before 6. I nodded. At exactly 6 o'clock, my office door opened. The janitor stood there, mop in hand. "It is time for you to go," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, wrong in a way I cannot fully describe. "I just need another hour," I replied. "I'll lock up." He stepped into the room, calmly, without argument. He reached down and unplugged my computer from the wall. The screen went black. An hour of unsaved work vanished. I stood up, furious. Then I saw his face. His expression was blank, but something beneath it was coiled and dangerous. His eyes were darker than they should have been, focused, predatory. "The work is done," he said slowly. "You leave now." I left. 3 days ago, I broke the rule again. We had received the body of a young woman who died suddenly from an undiagnosed cardiac condition. Her family arrived in a large group. The grief in that viewing room was overwhelming. The janitor entered. Silence followed. I decided that day I would find out the truth. At 5:30, I pretended to leave. Instead, I slipped into an old storage room filled with outdated supplies and broken equipment. I hid behind a metal shelving unit and waited. 6 o'clock passed. The building settled into silence. Then I heard it, a metallic clank, the heavy squeal of refrigeration hinges. The cold storage room. I stepped into the dark hallway, lit only by green emergency exit signs. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain it would give me away. The cold room door was slightly open. I heard a wet, tearing sound, and chewing. I looked inside. One of the refrigeration drawers was fully extended. The young woman's body lay on the metal tray. The janitor stood over her. His back faced me. Both arms were buried inside her abdominal cavity. There was no surgical incision, no tools. He had torn her open with his bare hands. He pulled something free with a wet, sucking sound. Her liver. He raised it to his mouth. His jaw opened wider than human anatomy allows. His teeth were black and jagged. He bit deeply into the organ, chewing loudly in the quiet room, swallowing chunks whole. I stepped backward in horror. My heel struck a biohazard bin. It crashed to the floor. The chewing stopped. A low growl filled the room. "Who is there?" he asked. I ran. I sprinted down the corridor, shoes slipping on tile. Behind me, the cold ruined door slammed open with violent force. His footsteps followed. They were fast. Too fast. I dove into the autopsy suite, scrambling behind an examination table. The swinging doors burst open. He entered. In the dim light, I saw him clearly. Blood covered his chest and chin. He stood taller than before, limbs elongated, fingers brushing the table edges. "You did not leave," he whispered. "You broke the rule." He walked slowly down the aisle between tables. I tried to crawl away. A massive, blood-soaked hand dropped from above and seized my shoulder. He lifted me effortlessly and hurled me across the room. I hit a metal cart and collapsed, breathless. He crouched over me. "Do you know what I am, doctor?" I shook my head. "I am a ghoul," he said calmly. "I consume the dead. I do not kill the living. That draws attention. I take only what is already lost." He explained the arrangement. He eats the livers, the richest organ, the essence. The senior examiner adjusts reports, missing tissue attributed to trauma or post-mortem damage. In exchange, he takes something else. "Their grief," he whispered. "When I consume the dead, I create a void. I whisper the ancient transaction and pull their sorrow into it. I swallow their agony. They leave with peace." It explained everything. The silence, the calm faces, the rule. "You are a loose thread now," he said. I begged. I offered compliance. I promised silence. He studied me for a long time. Then he leaned close to my ear. "If you speak," he whispered, "I will not wait for you to die." He released me. "Go home, doctor. The work is done." I fled. I have not returned in 3 days, but I must go back tomorrow. If I quit, I become unpredictable. If I run, I become suspicious. So I will return. I will process reports. I will sign paperwork. I will avoid the viewing room. And I will never, ever stay past 6 o'clock again.